The Mirror's Secret, a reflection of the past. When Emma moved into the old Victorian house, she had no idea that it was haunted, let alone by something far worse than a ghost. She had fallen in love with the place immediately. The high ceilings, the intricate woodwork, the antique furnishings. Despite its age, it had a warmth that felt comforting, like stepping into the embrace of history itself. But there was one item that Emma found unsettling the moment she laid eyes on it. A large antique mirror mounted on the wall in the hallway between the living room and the kitchen. The mirror's frame was ornate, gold with carvings of vines and flowers, and the glass was dark and worn. Yet, despite its age, the mirror had a certain allure. Emma couldn't help but feel drawn to it, and over time, she became obsessed with it. The first strange occurrence happened on the night she moved in. Emma had unpacked most of her belongings and was sitting in the living room trying to adjust to the silence of the house. Her cat, Max, was curled up at her feet. It was late and Emma was just about to go to bed when she noticed something peculiar in the hallway mirror. She hadn't seen anyone walk by, but there in the reflection, a faint figure stood just at the edge of the frame. Emma's heart skipped a beat. The figure was dark, almost shadow-like, and it was standing perfectly still. She rubbed her eyes, certain that fatigue was playing tricks on her, but when she looked again, the figure was still there. Her first instinct was to run, but something kept her in place. She stared at the reflection, waiting for the figure to move or disappear. It did neither. After what felt like an eternity, Emma hesitantly got up, her heart racing, and walked toward the mirror. As she approached, the figure faded, and the hallway returned to its quiet, empty state. Shaking her head, Emma tried to convince herself that it had been a trick of the light, a shadow cast by something outside. But even as she tried to rationalize it, the unease lingered in the pit of her stomach. The next day, she decided to investigate the history of the house. She visited the local library and spent hours combing through old newspapers and records. It didn't take long for her to uncover a disturbing piece of information. The house had once belonged to the Atkinson family, who had lived there for generations. The family was known for their wealth and influence, but their history was also marred by tragedy. The most shocking revelation came when Emma read about the tragic fate of Margaret Atkinson, the last surviving member of the family. Margaret was said to have gone mad in the house, and the rumors surrounding her death were chilling. It was whispered that she had become obsessed with a mirror, just like Emma was. The rumors suggested that Margaret had seen something in the reflection, something that drove her to madness. She died in the house, alone and forgotten, and the mirror was said to be the source of her torment. Emma was disturbed, but she brushed it off, chalking it up to local folklore. After all, she was a logical person, not one to succumb to superstitions. But that night, the mirror began to show her things again. At first, it was subtle, a glimpse of a figure in the corner of the reflection, a movement out of the corner of her eye, then it escalated. One evening, as Emma was walking past the mirror, she stopped to adjust her hair. Her reflection didn't match her movements. In the mirror, she was standing still, staring back at her with vacant eyes. Emma froze, her breath catching in her throat. She slowly turned her head to look around, but the house was empty. She faced the mirror again. This time her reflection smiled at her, a slow, unsettling grin that Emma had never made herself. Her heart raced as she backed away, but the reflection didn't stop smiling. Instead, it began to wave as if beckoning her. The reflection's movements were no longer synchronized with hers, as though it had a life of its own. The smile grew wider, and Emma's reflection mouthed something she couldn't hear, the words shaping into an eerie, silent whisper. Desperately, she turned and ran out of the hallway, the sound of her footsteps echoing through the house. She spent the rest of the night locked in her bedroom, terrified to even glance toward the hallway. But the mirror had other plans. For the next few weeks, Emma couldn't escape its pull. Every time she passed it, the reflection grew more vivid and disturbing. The figure that had once been a shadow now stood out in detail, a pale, gaunt woman in a tattered dress, her eyes hollow and black. Emma recognized her, Margaret Atkinson. The woman's image in the mirror started to change, becoming more violent. Sometimes she would see Margaret clawing at the glass, her hands pressing against it as if trying to break through. Other times, she would watch as Margaret's face twisted in agony, her features contorted into a grotesque mask of pain and fear. The longer Emma stared into the mirror, the more she felt her own sanity slipping away. One evening, Emma could no longer resist. She stood in front of the mirror for what felt like hours, waiting for Margaret to show herself again. And when she did, Emma reached out to touch the cold glass. The moment her fingers made contact, the reflection shifted. Margaret's face came closer to the surface, her eyes now wide with terror. Emma's hand trembled, but she couldn't pull away. Suddenly, a force yanked her forward, and she felt herself being pulled into the mirror, her body growing heavier with each passing second. The world around her seemed to distort, like sinking into a nightmare. With one final scream, Emma was pulled into the mirror, her body vanishing into the cold, dark reflection. The house remained silent. It wasn't until years later that a new family moved into the house. They found the same antique mirror in the hallway, but they paid no mind to it. It was just an old, beautiful object after all. And yet, as the days passed, they too began to notice strange things in the reflection. Shadows, movements, a coldness that seemed to emanate from the glass. Some things never change.